Hi, and welcome to Matt Holman Talks Mental Health, the podcast where I have the opportunity to sit down and chat with amazing humans. Today, I'm so happy to introduce Marie Chandler to the conversation. Welcome, Marie.
Welcome, nice to see you.
Thank you, lovely to see you too. So as I will always do, just a quick introduction from me, because this is your podcast and I want you to tell your introduction, your stories. But Marie and I have known each other for many years, actually. Oh gosh, too many to remember, probably nearly 25 to 30 years, I guess, since we first met. Back in the old days when we were young and, you know, fancy free out there and enjoying life to the max, of course. But we haven't really stayed in touch too much, and to be honest, but you know what, that doesn't matter, because these conversations are about reconnecting, about having conversations and just really checking in, seeing how things are, what's going on. So Marie, it's lovely to see you. It really genuinely is. And for anybody that's listening that needs to, you know, what wants to know, I'm sure you don't, Marie and I actually live about 50 foot away from each other, probably, but in different streets. So our offices back onto each other, bizarrely, but we are socially distanced. We're not in the same space, so we are looking after ourselves. So Marie, welcome. Introduce yourself. Do the proper introduction for us.
Brilliant. Thank you, Matt. So I'm really, really pleased to be here and chat. I mean, you know, mental health, well-being is a complete passion of mine, having been through it. And I'm more than happy to just go into my story. I had a brain tumor 5 years ago. I'd lived with it for 2 years. I was misdiagnosed by the hospital. So they told me it was just a lipoma, nothing to worry about. But as I ended up being on 36 tablets a day for the pain, it became apparent that it wasn't. So I eventually got a pain consultant to sort of take this seriously and do some scans, and found that I had a 10 centimetre tumour in my forehead that was embedded in my skull. It was called a meningioma. So within about 3 weeks, I was in having the operation to have it removed. My own stupid fault, about 8 weeks after brain surgery, I decided to go back to work full time, flying, doing all the stuff I was doing. And so I went back to work in the April, and then it became a complete surprise to me when I broke down in the November. And I remember that day, you know, like it was yesterday. It was the 14th of November. I'd been in Denmark the week before. I had a weekend that was great. Monday morning, I couldn't function. I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't remember where I was. I didn't know how to put one foot in front of the other. Just everything had shut down. And I'll tell you what, it scared the living daylights out of me. I really didn't know what was going on. I remember getting in my car and driving. I don't remember where. And I called my doctor, and you know, he was asking me all the questions, you know, where are you? I couldn't tell him where I was. I've lived in this town for all of my life, and yet I couldn't even recognize what I was doing. So he was very good. He directed me into the doctor's surgery, was on the phone to me while I was driving, saw me straight away. And the first thing he said to me was, I've been waiting for this to happen. I've been waiting. I've seen the signs. He said, but you fought it. He said, and now it's happened. And I think that was the scariest thing, really, was being diagnosed with depression and anxiety, and having to go home and tell my family and Peter, my other half, because there was nothing physically wrong with me. I looked like the same person, but my brain was broken. Right. And, you know, I was mortified. I was worried that I was going to be judged. I was worried that they were going to be ashamed of me. I was worried that they were going to be embarrassed by what I was going to tell them. And I think that was the hardest thing I had to do, was to go back and tell my family and Peter that I was broken and I didn't know how to fix it. So that ended up with me being off work for 9 months whilst I recovered. And my GP was absolutely brilliant, because even when I said to him, I'm ready to go back to work now, he said, that's fine. He said, but you need to live with your recovery before you go back to work. So I felt like a bit of a fraud towards the end, because I felt fine, but he was still saying, you know, you need to get back into life before you start taking on work. And I don't know about you, Matt, but I used that time to assess my life, to think, you know, am I doing what I want to do? Am I in the right place? You know, is Basingstoke where I want to be? You know, all of these things were going through my head around. I think you have that life-changing moment, don't you? And then you start really thinking, you know, I've had this wake-up call. What am I doing with my life? Yeah. And I think that's when I realised that the job I was in at the time, was a contributing factor to how I was feeling. It was long hours, it was lots of traveling. Wellbeing was becoming my passion. So I trained as a mental health first aider while I was recovering, because I wanted to understand the why. I wanted to understand what had happened to me and why. But I also made a promise to myself that I would come out of it stronger, and that I would try and use my experience to help others. Brilliant. So when I got the job at Nats, which was, head of wellbeing, it was brilliant, because it gave me a platform to start talking about things and helping others in a way that I could use it positively. So that's just, a bit of my story and my background.
Wow, what an introduction. That was the introduction question. We're going to get into the journey of mental health in a minute. And I think, but what I love, Marie, about that is your candidacy, your honesty, your openness to say, I had a broken brain, it was in a place that was, you needed to sit down and talk to people. And it's such an important part. We'll get into that as part of the conversation about opening up and sharing and, showing some of that maybe vulnerability, or, I think it's about being brave more than vulnerable in many ways, to say words like, I have depression, I have anxiety, and I need some help. It's really important, isn't it? But thank you for sharing that as we start. And for anybody listening, of course, just to make sure everybody feels okay with that, please, if you're uncomfortable with any of the thoughts or comments or things that are being talked about, then make sure you take care of yourself as well, because it is important. These conversations for this podcast are all about being honest and telling our story as it is and the realities that we've lived through. I'm fascinated by your perspective, Marie. You've done so much. So let's try and cram in as much as we can into this conversation of what you've done in terms of, let's start with the big question, your journey with mental health. And I maybe take it back a little bit further, if that's okay, to your life, before you had this moment, because I think we get to a moment, don't we, where things just go bang, this is like crash. But talk a little bit about that and then how that sort of translates into where you are now, if that's all right.
Yeah, so I think, from a lifestyle point of view, I worked for a company. I was head of quality and health and safety. I looked after Europe, Middle East and Africa, so a very big region. For 5 years, I was traveling non-stop. So I was very rarely home. So I spent a lot of time away from home, away from my family, and just constantly on the go all the time. And I think in those couple of years when I was misdiagnosed and I was taking all those tablets and everything, I'm sure, like a lot of people, I had the mask on, I had everything's fine, I'm just taking some tablets. And we actually got to the point where we were joking. So my phone would go off to remind me to take the tablets. I'd actually named the lump on my head. It was called Eric. And my team used to say to me, Marie, Eric needs feeding. And that was the big joke, was around, I have to take these tablets, and it was to sort Eric out. Then when I actually had the operation to have it removed, I was very blasé about it. So I was like, I'm divorcing Eric, this is it. He's no longer part of me anymore. That's it. It's done. Finished. As soon as the operation's done and I've recovered, that's it. It's over with. And I don't really think I'd accepted it properly, or accepted the impact that it was going to have on me. And I don't think I accepted that at the time that I needed to accept it. And that's what then led to the breakdown sort of 5-6 months later.
Yeah, well, yeah, incredible. And I like the way you detach that thing as being something separate, give it its own identity, give it its own name. But obviously it left its damage was left as well with what it did and created the other traumas. I do want to touch on one quick question, if that's okay, just around the traveling piece, because it's a big pet project of mine. And it's it was one of the reasons why I struggled a lot with my own mental well-being. When you were traveling so excessively, how were you feeling at those points? Not necessarily with what was going on your head at the time, but were there moments in there that you struggled with as well?
Yeah, I was lonely.
Yeah.
It's not well, in the industry I was working in, it was a very male-dominated industry. So for a female to be traveling to, the likes of South Africa, Turkey, some of these countries where it's not usual to see a female, especially on sites, because that's what I was doing. So I did feel lonely. I did feel disconnected. I felt that I was missing out on things that were happening at home. My nephew had just been born, and I felt I was missing out his first few years. And I don't know about you, Matt, but there were occasions when I woke up in the morning and I didn't know where I was, or two, I didn't even know what country I was in, because I'd done 3 or 4 countries in a week.
Yep.
And it just took me a while in the morning just to think, so where am I today? Oh yeah, I'm in Sweden today. Yesterday I was in Germany. And yeah, it just got to the point where, you know, a hotel room was a hotel room. I no longer got impressed by the biscuits or, you know, and do you know what, that impacted my personal life, because when Peter and I used to go on holiday, you know, he'd be all excited to get to the airport and go in the bar and have a drink and go to the hotel, and I'd be like, I do this every week, it's just, you know, hotel room's a hotel room. There was no excitement for me anymore to go on holiday because of the amount of traveling I was doing work-wise.
Yeah, that's such a parallel reality that I was living in as well. And I used to prefer driving for holidays, like we drive to the south of France rather than fly down, because I just didn't want to go on an aeroplane. I spent so much of my life. I actually saw going on an airplane like getting on a bus or a train.
Yeah, it was such common practice.
Yeah, it gets me from point A to B. I didn't get excited in the middle, and you know the kids did, and you know, and everything else. But
unfortunately, I was always that person. You know, when they're saying we're just waiting for one more passenger to board. Yeah, I was always that one, you know, that was like half hour before this flight closed.
Oh, right, yeah.
I'm here. Get on the plane.
They found me asleep in New York. I always remember in JFK Airport, found me asleep in the corner of the lounge because I was so tired, and I was just literally blending in with the furniture, I think. Brilliant. So let's move beyond where you had your crisis moment. You were diagnosed with depression, anxiety, and thank you again for sharing that. You got a new job with Nats, this well-being role. So talk a bit about what that means to you and what you've done, because you've been there for a while and you're doing some amazing stuff, you know, and you're being recognized in the industry as well, which is just fantastic. I want to call that out early, that you're doing amazing work, and it shows, you know, anybody that follows you, listens to you, you're very, you know, open about your experience to help others, right?
I think we've got to be. You know, Nats gave me the opportunity to take over Wellbeing, so that was a brand new role. It was never in the company before, so to have a brand new role and think, okay, what do I want to do with this? How can I really break down the stigma of talking about mental health within the company? You know, Nats has got 4,200 people. For those people who don't know, we look after the UK airspace, so you know, half of our employees are what we call air traffic controllers, so those in the towers and our operational centres. So when you do fly, when you need permission to land, that's what we do. So one, it was a fascinating new world for me, because I'd always been the passenger rather than on the sort of the operational side. It stopped me travelling, so yes, I do go to some nice places now, but it's once a year. So it was just nice to be home. It was nice to have a base. It was nice to not have to think about my 3 a.m. you know, wake up call. So that was a really nice bit. And we're regulated hours, so we have to abide by the 40 hours a week, and we get picked up on if that's exceeded. So to go from sort of, you know, as you know, 70, 80 hours a week, I sort of was home by 4:30, and I was sat twiddling my thumbs thinking, I'm sure I'm supposed to be doing something, or you know, traveling somewhere. But so it was a big shift for me, but I had made a promise to Peter and my family that after I recovered, I would look after myself and I wouldn't push myself like I did before, because I will admit I was a workaholic. That's all I did. I worked, and I probably did not much else. I've got a completely different life now, and the pleasure of working for Nats is they're so receptive to well-being. The first thing I did was tell my story openly and honestly, so that I could open up, and the response I got from people was, you know, thank you for sharing and thank you for understanding. We've done so much in terms of, you know, we have a dedicated peer support program, which is 130 peer supporters across the business who are trained in what we call CISM, which is critical incident stress management, and also mental health first aid. But we purposely decided to call them peer supporters because that's what they do. They're there to help colleagues through an initial period of distress. So they're all fully trained. I've got a dedicated peer support program manager that's all they do. They run that program, they do the training. We do all the training in-house. And you know, in terms of what COVID has brought us, we've seen a huge increase in the number of calls to our hotline, so a 24/7 confidential hotline number that all staff can phone. We've got peer supporters at the exec level, so all the way through the organisation, we've got people trained, and we're seeing about 80 calls a month at the moment in terms of the peer support, and that's on top of the people that are phoning our employee assistance program as well, who are getting sort of the official counselling and the sessions that they provide. So all I'm hoping is that with COVID, I think people have felt able to open up and talk about well-being because it's safe and it's related to COVID. What I really want is for people to continue this when COVID has gone. And what we've done in the last year about opening up and being honest and talking to people about our stories, that this carries on post-COVID, and we've created that space now for people to feel safe to talk. And just while we're talking about safe, can I just introduce my blue elephant?
Yeah, this is a visual prompt for anybody that's listening on the podcast. There's a blue elephant cuddly toy now.
Yeah, so we have these blue elephants because it's actually an international symbol of what's called a safe space to talk. Right. So when I'm on my calls here at work in my office, which is at home, he's always there on my shoulder, so people know that we create that safe space for people to talk. And everyone asks me, what's the elephant for? And it's just a discussion point. It usually just breaks the ice because then I can talk to them about what it is, and they're like, oh, okay, cool. So yeah, that's my visual. That's my blue elephant that I always have around.
It's incredible if you think about that evolutionary process that you've been through from where you were to now, and you're engaging in open conversations. You've got this wonderful peer support network, which I'm just going to ask a couple of little pieces around that, if that's okay, because I know I work with a lot of companies, and there's a lot of companies out there that are saying we don't really know what we're supposed to be doing with things like mental health first aiders, and what I love is the fact that you haven't just said we've got mental health first aiders first and foremost, which is something I'm trying to make sure people understand. It's not the answer to the question of how, it's part of the solution process. That means there's something there that I can connect to. So your peer support is something that I think lots of people would be potentially interested in, a similar sort of network. And would you be open to anybody contacting you to talk about that?
Yeah, of course. We do a lot of best practice sharing about our peer support. I mean, it's technically been running for 16 years.
Yep.
We just changed the name 3 years ago to peer support. Okay. And it's just gone from strength to strength. So I'm more than happy to talk about it and what we do and how it works.
Great stuff. And for anybody listening, check out Marie, and we'll put the posts, when you see this out there, it will be connected to all of your social posts, and the things that you do. So do follow, because I just find this fascinating that, we often struggle to think, okay, who's doing good jobs, who's doing good stuff. Peer support is a wonderful opportunity. You're getting 80 calls a month. Now, I do want to ask you the question, the calls you're getting, what sort of calls are you getting?
So that they could be anything from, someone facing a relationship breakdown and they just want to talk to somebody. Okay. We've had more serious cases of suicide, of domestic abuse. So it's a whole range spectrum of calls. And I think what's the important thing to say is that our peer supporters are not trained counsellors. But what we do is we it's like psychological first aid, the same as you would do for physical first aid. We wouldn't try and do surgery to repair someone's broken leg, but what we can do is pull the appropriate services or help people get a GP appointment or something like that, and signpost them into the direction in which they need to go. And that's what we've done with some of those calls. Some of them have needed some occupational health referrals, which we can do. Some of them have gone on to do counselling with our EAP provider. So it's really about the fact that they're phoning someone who's in the same business as them, who understands what's going on and can just talk to them as humans and then help them get the help that they need. And that's really what it's about.
Yeah, and that's perfect. It's accessible for anybody's challenges or thoughts, and that's the thing that we want to get across with all of these sort of support networks is, if you're worried about it, talk about it, be honest and open. It's what we've got to encourage, right? Which is why we have these open story sharing sessions. And what's interesting, I know you mentioned earlier about I hope that beyond COVID we continue the conversations, and actually all it takes is us to continue the conversations, right?
Exactly.
We don't have to sort of go, oh well, today we finished COVID, so now we finished talking about, and this is we know this is going to get more challenging. I think that's
I think it's just more the point about businesses. Businesses have really put a focus on mental well-being and mental health during COVID, because it's in the news, it's in the media, everybody talks about it. But I would love for businesses to continue with their for instance, my budget for peer support has never been diminished through everything that we've been going on. It's remained the same. I still have the resource available to provide that support, even though there's financial difficulties going on. So, you know, my plea is to companies is, you know, continue that budget, continue that money, that support, you know, because even post-COVID, well-being and mental health is important. And now we've started talking about it. We need to continue.
Yeah, and you're right, absolutely. So that was the plea to everybody out there. Just continue to lobby your businesses to invest in the people, right? It's people first. We've got to remind ourselves the humans are the ones that are struggling. Yes, businesses are challenged right now. It will, we hope, will return at some point in the future, but humans also are impacted by all of those things, which I just think that's fascinating that you're doing more with it. So how are you at the moment, Marie? How are you feeling at the moment?
Do you know what? Yesterday afternoon and today, I must admit, I'm feeling like I'm sort of wading through treacle at the moment. Everything seems a little bit harder than it should be.
Yeah.
I can't put my finger on why. I think, you know, there's just been a lot going on recently. So I've just booked a couple of days off, just to get away from work. Obviously, I can't get away from my living environment or where I am because of lockdown, but it's just to give myself a break from work. So yeah, so it's a bit weird today. I think I'm struggling, if I'm honest. I'm struggling today, but I can't put my finger on why. So I'll just hold that question for now and see what comes out.
Well, hopefully, you know, this is the reality, isn't it? Is I ask you a question that is one that we should be asking each other regularly, and then it shouldn't be a, oh dear, I'm sorry to hear that. It should just be a, you know, recognition that that's what's happening. And tomorrow, I hope it's going to be better. And, you know, the changes in our mental health, and that's mental health, isn't it? Exactly there.
Exactly.
And that's what we're trying to help people to recognize is everything, you know, when I feel happy, it's mental health. And when I feel sad, it's mental health. And it's not that.
That's one of the key messages that I've been given to the business is that, you know, everybody has mental health.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's good or bad or whatever it may be, actually we all have it. So we can talk about it when it's good and we feel quite comfortable. But when it's bad, why is it so difficult to talk about it then? And I think that's because you've got people in two camps. You've got those that will shy away from the conversation. So if you don't say I'm fine and you say, well, actually I'm struggling today, they're going to run a mile because they don't know what to say to you and how to deal with it. Yeah. Or you've got those people that are going to, you know, immediate rescue mode and want to help you fix what's going on or rescue you and, you know, solve all your problems for you, when actually all I wanted was someone just to listen to me. So I think that's what we need to break down as well, is that that people don't always need rescuing. They just want someone to listen to them. And actually, you might not be able to help them other than say, well, how about you speak to someone in peer support or the Samaritans or whatever charity that's out there. And maybe that's the one thing that you can do for them is signpost them in the direction in which they can get some help. Yeah.
You've just prompted me to ask the question that I unfortunately didn't ask earlier, which I should have, which was the moment you told your family and friends, this moment of openness, you know, where you had to sit down. What was the reaction like? How was that taken? Because the thing you mentioned there that triggered that thought for me was the fixing. As family, we become very fixated on fixing the problems, don't we? How did that happen? What happened?
So I had three very different reactions.
Okay.
So my mum immediately went into hug, fix, what can we do? How can we help? Let's get through this together. You know, all of that sort of stuff. And to be honest with you, I wouldn't have got through it without her, because she was the one that was here every morning, getting me out of bed, getting me up and ready, making me go out for a walk. And because otherwise I would have just not done anything. Yeah. My dad had been through something very, very similar back in 2006. So he just looked at me and went, I know. And that was it. That's all I needed. And all the way through, he used to say to me, we used to call our moments of washing machine moments. So he'd say to me things like, you on full spin today? And I'll be like, yep. Right. And that's just when everything was completely jumbled in my head and I just couldn't put everything together. And then Peter, my other half, he sort of went into a bit of denial, first of all. So I told him, he went upstairs, he had to think about it for a bit, and then he came down and just said, I don't know what to do. And it's like, neither do I said, so we're going to have to just muddle through this together. So 3 very, very different reactions to me telling them.
Okay. And what would you say to people now listening, knowing that reaction? What would you say to people?
Yeah, I mean, obviously everybody's different. But I think if I'm completely honest, my mum smothered me, and I felt claustrophobic and I know it was love. I totally know that. But at the time it was like, I don't know how to deal with this. I think my dad's just gentle acknowledgement was the best one. Just that, I know, what do you want from me? And it was so little, but it meant so much to me, that I knew he was there. I knew if I needed him, he'd help me, but it was on my terms. It was when I wanted it. And I think, that was the approach for me that resounded sort of how I was feeling at that moment in time.
Well, I find it fascinating. I really do, because you're right. Everyone is different, and we are all unique. So I don't want anybody to think that's the way to fix it, or that's the way to do it, or that's the way to solve it. Everyone will have their own unique journey. Of course, on reflection, you can think that way. At the time when you're in it, people do, and we all react in different ways to it.
I think the key question to ask anybody is what do you need right now? Because it's not about what my mum needed or my dad needed. It was about what I needed. And I think, that's one of the things that we say to people right now, is when they've spoken to us, the first question is, so how do you feel now after you've spoken about it? And what do you need? Because ultimately they are going to know or not know, but they're the ones that are going to have to think about it, because, and it's just being there for them to let them talk that through and think about, okay, so what do I need right now? Do I need time off? Do I need to speak to someone else? Do I need to just reflect on what I've told you? Do I just need to go and sleep it off for a couple of hours because I feel drained? They're the ones that are going to be able to point you in the direction of what they need.
And that is the key, isn't it? It's listen to the person that's got the challenges to really ask those questions. It reminds me of sitting there at Samaritans, and I'm sure no doubt with the peer, like you said, with the peer support team, just giving the person the ability to use their language, their words to say, and sometimes they might say, I don't know what I need, but that's okay as well, right?
And do you know what? The biggest tool that we have is silence. Just letting someone speak, not filling in the gaps, not finishing their sentences, not preempting what they're going to say. Just listen. And if it goes to silent for a minute, there's a reason why. They're just collecting their thoughts. They're just thinking about things. So don't try and fill it. Just let that silence happen. Because it just gives people that breathing space that they need.
It does, absolutely. And we're coming right to the end of this now, and it just feels like the time, I say it on every one, and I like a broken record, the time just disappears when we're engaged in these such interesting conversations. I really, I just want to say, Marie, it's been a long time we haven't really spoken to each other. I know we caught up just recently for a little minutes, minutes I'm talking, but it's just lovely to hear, what you've been through. Of course, that's not lovely to hear that you've been through experiences that you've been through, but knowing where you are now, knowing how you can be very open about that and say to people, like I asked you how you feel today, and you were honest about that. And I think that's just a wonderful sort of realization of you're human. No matter what your role is in your position or what you might do, you're human first. And that's so important. So thank you so much. I'm going to let you say the final sort of thoughts, words. You might want to use the Mark Twain quote behind you as well, which for anybody listening on I always do that. With anybody listening on a podcast, you won't have a clue what I'm talking about, but I'll read it, or you can say it. But final thoughts from you, Marie.
So behind me, what Matt's pointing to is I have the Action for Happiness calendar that I look at every month, and this February is Friendly February. So it says the best way to cheer yourself up is to cheer somebody else up. And I think that is so true.
Brilliant. Any final other thoughts you want to share? I don't want to just close it at that. If you've got other things you want to share with anybody.
No, just please be open with yourself and with others. Let's carry on this talking. I could talk for hours on this. I think it's a fascinating subject. But let's just, if you nothing else, just ask somebody how they're doing today, and see what response you get from them.
Brilliant stuff. No, I really appreciate it. The best way to cheer yourself up is to cheer somebody else up, and you've cheered me up no end, Marie. Thank you so much for this conversation this morning.
No problem at all.
I love talking on these or listening to people's stories. Thank you so much. For anybody that is struggling or you do need extra support and help, know there are always organizations or people that you can talk to. If you're worried about anything that we've spoken about today, or you're worried or concerned you might have your own challenges, please do make sure you reach out and talk to somebody. It's so important. You know, that first conversation can really change the future, or the deviation for the future. So make sure you do. Samaritans exist today 24/7. You know, call them if you need to, 116 123, or you could text to shout, actually 85258, just to get some text or message support if you need to as well. Thank you, Marie. Really appreciate it. I wish you all the very best. Look after yourself. Stay safe. 50 foot away from me. And I'll take you soon. Take care.
Cheers, Matt. Bye.